I like the idea of I liked how he was pissing off every religious movement out there, and I knew from a very early age that I was an atheist. When I first joined the band it was actually a pretty dark time in my life. I wanted to get out of Santa Barbara. I got the chance, so I took it. Well, I was a little nervous because I'd hardly ever flown on planes before, and all the guys had to go on a completely different flight than me because the decision for me to go was made 2 days before the show. Grew up in Torrance, California. A little bit of a loner, for sure. Didn't really grow up and have a lot of friends until I probably hit about sophomore year of high school. I was really into BMX, skateboarding, hockey for a while. Yeah, and just played a lot of guitar in my downtime. I think a lot of this generation has a lot more tools at their disposal because of the internet and things like Guitar Pro, YouTube, and where back in my day, I had to take lessons in order to get some of that information, or, have a subscription to Guitar World or something like that in order to learn new things. Couldn't just go online and download a tab. I had my let's see, like Metallica, the Black Album. I had that guitar book. I know I had Master of Puppets, Injustice for All. I learned a lot off that record. I had Rage Against the Machine's first record, a lot of Nirvana. Those are some of the main tab books that I spent a lot of time with when I was a kid. Even going back in time with Def Leppard, High and Dry and Pyromania and On Through the Night, I love those records. Love them, even more than Hysteria. When I was a kid, it was Def Leppard's Pour Some Sugar on Me. I was only, what year did that come out? I couldn't have been more than 6 years old. I saw that on MTV, and that was the moment where I just knew that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. High and Dry is my favorite Def Leppard record. Unfortunately, they didn't release anything I liked after that, but Metallica came and saved the day, and Pantera and Megadeth and Alice in Chains, and then when I was a sophomore, I got really into Marilyn Manson. And that wasn't really much of an influence on my guitar style, I wouldn't say, maybe a little bit. It made what I wanted to do in life, it made me that much more hungry. I like the idea of I liked how he was pissing off every religious movement out there, and I've never been a big fan of religion in general, and I don't really care. I mean, some of my roommates are very Christian, but I don't hate it to that point. But for me personally, I got a lot of shit when I was a kid because I knew from a very early age that I was an atheist, and I was surrounded by a bunch of kids that went to church every day, and all of a sudden I was the bad kid, and then the parents found out and they didn't want their kids hanging out with me, and you can just imagine where things went. So when Marilyn Manson came around, I was like, oh, this is a guy I can relate to. When I moved to Santa Barbara, that was when I actually joined my first real band that actually started playing shows around California called Sister Rot. That lasted 2 years. Then I joined another band in Santa Barbara called Grolby, and that consisted of a lot of the guys that became DevilDriver. John Miller, Jeff Kendrick, John Berkland. That only lasted about 8 months until our singer quit, and around that time is when John Berkland started working with Dez on DevilDriver, and 2 years after that I joined DevilDriver. When I first joined the band, it was actually a pretty dark time in my life, and I wanted to get out of Santa Barbara. I wasn't really happy with my music school at the time, and there was other shit going on in my life. I was just like, I want to get out of here, and it wasn't so much me running away from my problems, but it was just like, okay, I'm done with school. I want to go play in a band, and I got the chance, so I took it. I dropped out of school. I was working at the UPS store at the time. Luckily, my manager was really cool, but the owners almost fired me. I showed up to work that day, but I was like, I can't stay. I just need you to take my passport photo, and I'm out of here. I only worked there for a couple of months after that, but I knew, we were opening up for In Flames in Europe, and I had never toured before. I'd never even played a show outside of California or even LA County. The whole idea was just completely surreal. I was a little nervous because I'd hardly ever flown on planes before, and all the guys had to go on a completely different flight than me because the decision for me to go was made 2 days before the show. So I had one night to learn all the songs, stayed up all night with Jeff, and got on a plane next day and took 3 flights to get me to Sweden. And once we got there, everyone was super cool, and I didn't, especially my second tour with the band was Ozfest, and I was expecting a lot of egos and just arrogant rock star assholes, and everybody was so awesome. I mean, everybody. And I'm grateful that I chose a music genre that consists of the type of people, because we're all a bunch of, for the most part, just a bunch of nerds that like heavy metal. And, most people in this genre just treat everybody with a lot of respect. It's very friendly, and there's that instant connection, like, just like we were in high school. You like heavy metal? Yeah, we're gonna be friends. My influence with the band has been a kind of a slow, steady process since I joined. I obviously wasn't on the first record, and then when we started doing The Fury, I was the new guy, so I treaded lightly with the guys. I knew, when you join a band, it's like joining a new club. You got to work your way up the ranks. There's a pecking order. And I knew my place, but I was the only one that knew how to record. And so they needed me to record the demos. So that gave me a little bit of power. And, I ended up writing Hold Back the Day, or a lot of that song. John Berkman wrote a fair amount of it as well, but that became our first single off that record. And so I started getting a lot of backing from people like Monty Connor at Roadrunner, telling the other guys to let me write a little bit more, even though it's no secret, some of them really didn't want me to. And so I really had to kind of fight my way through the pecking order of the band and to allow them to let me write. And with every record, it got a little bit easier. And with Trust No One, with the departure of John Berkman, who was, the main songwriter of the band, then he was out, and that became me. And I wanted to do the whole record by myself, maybe with some help from our producer, Mark Lewis, at first, but then I got introduced to Neil and Austin, and we clicked immediately. To tell you the truth, the whole process is a bit of a blur. I had just moved out of my parents' house, and I was looking to buy a house. That didn't end up working out because a girlfriend situation went south. And I ended up moving into my grandmother's old house and, built a studio in the garage. I think it took me about 16 months to build that thing, but it was just before the end of the record cycle, and I knew I needed to get it done before we started doing the record because I wanted to do the record there. And we did end up doing all the guitars and bass and pre-production there, but so I did that, and then I started writing immediately, and between that, working for my dad, and moving, that whole 2 years is just a bit of a blur. For me, personally, it's the most important DevilDriver record I've ever done, by far.